So you consider the river water as a crop?
Well, it is a national resource.
I think this fresh water going through our lakes is now clear, not totally fresh, poor in nutrient salts than before, and so it must affect also the eastern part of the Mediterranean.
Decreased flow of Nile water reaching the Mediterranean, do you know what effect it has on the sea?
Well, you see, on the sea, you mean?
On the sea.
On the sea. No, I don't think there is any effect of that.
So actually we have 90% of the total yearly discharge has been prevented from reaching the Mediterranean. This will actually change it drastically.
This lack of fresh water, these changes that are happening here, will affect the entire Mediterranean.
In its northward journey through half the African continent, the Nile crosses not only distance, but time. For uncounted centuries, the river has mirrored the passage of men and animals that have drawn life from it. A life often little changed since the first farmers came to its desert valley. Their existence regulated by the rise and fall of the river, many of the peasants or fellahin still water their fields and turn the soil with tools unchanged since recorded history began. The fellahin endure. The early civilizations out of which they came have long since vanished, leaving behind their burial chambers and broken temples, mute testaments of past glory and the brief tenure of power. Today, a new civilization stands on the Nile. But, as the Cousteau team discovers, the present, no less than the past, still owes its existence to the river. Year by year, more lives are suspended on the river's slender thread. In the expanding cities of Egypt and the Sudan, in Cairo and Khartoum, in Alexandria or Juba, the populations multiply, threaten to outpace the food supplied by the river's narrow margin of fertile earth. Egypt remains, as an early historian described it, the gift of the Nile, a crowded oasis locked in the immense emptiness of the desert. To meet growing needs, men have built huge structures across the Nile, turned the river god into a servant. But sometimes technology itself creates new dangers, threatens the very human ends it tries to serve.
Our problem begins in 1960,
Yes.
when the Egyptian government determined to build the high dam. And the government told us to get out from here to New Halfa, but we refused.
For most of its course since early history, the Nile has provided a clearly marked path between Central Africa and the sea. But in southern Sudan, in the vast marshlands of the Sud, even the river seems to lose its way. Below Philippe Cousteau and the Catalina spreads a watery archipelago as large as England. Through the maze of channels that in the past sometimes took months to cross, the barge carrying the men and vehicles of the Cousteau overland team threads its way north toward rendezvous. In this great shallow basin, where the upper Nile loses half its water through evaporation, an endlessly varied life shares sanctuary. Here, hidden amid the drifting masses of water hyacinth and papyrus that often clog the channels, thousands of scattered tribesmen, Nuer, Dinka, or Shilluk, live in a world apart. Changing yet changeless, the Nile flows through their lives, its seasonal rise and fall the stately measures of eternity. As plane and barge make rendezvous in the northern stretches of the Sud, Philippe and his companions change transport for a further journey. By swamp vehicle, they penetrate the domain of one of the remaining tribal monarchs, still formally recognized by the Sudanese government. Like the river itself, the king of the Shilluks too is a symbol of eternity. Here, posing for Philippe with his family, with his possessions and his prized herds of cattle, with Sudanese representatives and his private guard, he is a living link between past and future, the visible assurance of tribal continuity. Because Shilluk legend still celebrates an earlier French visitor, Captain Jean-Baptiste Marchand, who led an historic march across Africa more than 8 decades ago, Philippe and the team are honored with a ceremonial display. Later, in audience with the king, Philippe is shown faded photographs of the king's ancestor with Captain Marchand, whose small party, well supplied with champagne, briefly challenged British power on the Nile.
I would like to know from His Majesty what port of